President Zelensky has told the White House to take their mineral deal and stick it where the sun doesn't shine. Just how bad was this deal for the Ukrainians? Why did the U.S. think they could even push this thing? And what does Russia plan for their own negotiations, peace negotiations, if you will? Plus, we're going to talk about Trump's questionable appointments, particularly within the FBI. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay. So this is, I think, the top story. Zelensky has said, I'm not signing this mineral deal. This is completely preposterous, right? He pushed back on what actually does appear to be a $500 billion deal, right? Bear in mind, guys, the U.S. in total has provided around $100 billion in funds in funds and munitions to Ukraine. Again, that will be financed with Ukrainian natural resource revenue. And he said the same thing that we have been saying on this channel for the past week, that you cannot give someone aid and then surprise them and say it was a debt, right? Now, there could be some sort of deal that, as he points out, could entrench U.S. interests and Ukraine's reserves, but this has to look like more of a security guarantee relationship. We've talked about this, that it's not clear that this deal complies with Ukrainian law. It's not clear that the president of Ukraine has the authority to sign such a deal any more than the United States can't promise someone else's, let's say you had a silver mine on your property. The U.S. government can't come in and be like, you're going to give all this silver to the Chinese. You'd go, well, it's not yours to give away, government. So So in addition to not being fundamentally legal, the deal itself also didn't make any sense, right? The deal does not make any sense because it vastly outweighs the $100 billion the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. And it's such a bad deal that those $100 billion, right, the $500 billion of Ukrainian natural resources that would be charged, essentially, it would be more worth it for Ukraine to use that money to fund their own war effort, right? They can just buy war material on the open market, right? Again, there's also a problem that there's no security guarantees. This is just a retroactive bill that contains no positive provisions for the Ukrainians, right? This is, again, a situation where you say you're retroactively sending someone a bill, but you can't even call that a deal, right? A deal involves two parties exchanging goods and services, right? Just because someone kicks into your house, puts a gun to your head and says, you're going to sign over your property to me, that document isn't legal because it's not a deal. It's not an exchange. It is just a coercive one-way transfer, right? And as Zelensky himself said, quote, I'm not signing something that will be paid by 10 generations of Ukrainian, saying that he instead wants a dialogue with Trump, which is a complete waste of time because as we've seen, Trump says radically different stuff day to day to day. So it literally doesn't matter if you have a conversation with him on Tuesday, because by Wednesday, he might be saying the things you talked about. He might be saying the opposite of that, or he might be saying some other crazy fucking thing, right? The only people that are worth talking to are representatives of the U.S. government, like, again, Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, to a lesser extent, the Treasury Secretary, right? Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick. Unfortunately, they have spent exactly, what is it, the 24th? They've spent exactly 33 days in any kind of government service position. So they don't really have a great idea of what they're doing. But you notice that the people who have spent time in government service, when the Ukrainians meet with them, magically, they seem to be able to come out saying with the same fundamental visions of the world, right? How is that possible? It's because if you do this for a living, lo and behold, you get better at it, right? So the Ukrainian leader, right, Zelensky also points out that the future aid the U.S. proposed, by the way, this $500 billion deal doesn't include future aid, which is itself absurd. The U.S. said the interest rate on future aid is 100%. Okay? For the record, in the U.S., your high interest credit cards are at like 22% per year. So this kind of absurd agreement is just really fundamentally disrespectful to the Ukrainians. It's disrespectful to fundamental ideas about the United States and what it means to provide aid. And it's fundamentally an affront to even just like the concept of business. And it honestly says more about the Trump administration, the Trump Treasury Secretary, that they believe that these are deals that they can get signed, right? This is exactly how sort of the worst class of real estate businessmen operates. They find people who are desperate. Again, people who, for example, tenants who can't afford to move out of a unit. And they'll say, well, if you don't want to move out, you're going to pay 15, 20, 30% more in rent, right? They will routinely find people. Again, they'll find families who are, or real estate property owners who are desperate for one reason or another, and they'll come and they'll lowball them with coercive offers. This is exactly what the worst tier of real estate investor does. I hate those people, and it pains me to see this kind of South Florida, New York real estate dirtbag tactic being used on the international stage and being attributed to the United States. But the important thing is Ukraine is not out here feeling all that desperate. They aren't nearly as desperate as you might think. Why is that? Well, Ukraine's top military leadership is saying, actually, guys, I think we are at an inflection point, right? Russia, as they point out, is running out of a lot of the things it needs most, right? While Russian arms factories continue to manage some level of growth, particularly in glide bombs and drones, the overall trend of the Kremlin's capacity to deliver weapons is trending downward. But more importantly, right, the Russian government is scaling back its own estimates of how many soldiers it can contract. It thinks it's going to get 100,000 less soldiers than they got in 2024, but that's the Russian government's official estimates, right? Russian government routinely gets very pie in the sky estimates, very pie in the sky fantasies about what they're going to achieve and what they're going to get done. So the real number is probably something like a 50% reduction or more. And this is again on top of the fact that currently the Russian units in combat today have massively slowed down, massively reduced in terms of their ability to conduct these high attrition assaults. We're seeing more and more stories about Russian units basically forcing contract soldiers whose contracts have a definite end date to indefinitely extend their military service. So it looks more and more like Russian troops are pulling out all the stops, making more and more desperate actions to try to offset what appears to be a massive plummeting in Russian recruitment, right? There's also, of course, increasingly, the sanctions by Western countries are grinding on Russian energy production, right? Remember, the specialty equipment, while Russia can get them, it has to take a convoluted and expensive route through China or another non-sanctioned country. And this sort of friction introduced in the system, while it doesn't stop any given system, it raises the cost. And we've seen this already, where Russian mines, particularly nickel mines, very publicly said, we have to downgrade our expectation. We cannot mine nickel without the requisite equipment. And Putin was so mad that, remember, the head of Russia's nickel mining concern fell out of a window when he made that announcement, right? And conveniently, his replacement said, actually, guys, we were just kidding. Nickel production is going to surge in 2025. So this is not what you do when your country is thriving, okay? And the fact is that Russian shell production is only producing about 50% of Russian military needs. North Korea is filling that gap, but North Korea itself, remember, Kim Jong-un's priority is still to maintain a deterrent with South Korea, and he needs his artillery reserves to do that. So this is, again, I think a sign of weakness, and I don't think it's also the Ukrainians that say this, but that doesn't mean, right, that everyone isn't trying to project their own message, right? For example, again, all Western leaders in response to this massive ball dropping by the United States Here's every Western leader who went into Kyiv literally earlier today, right? You can see here Spain's prime minister, Iceland's prime minister, Denmark's prime minister, European Commission president, European Council president, Latvia's president, Ukraine's first lady, Ukraine's president, Finland's president, Lithuania's president, Canada's prime minister, Estonia's president, Norway's prime minister, Sweden's, France's, and France's delegate to for European affairs. So these are top tier leaders who, on a moment's notice, flew to Ukraine literally to create this photo that says we literally are standing together, right? And it's worth noting that while these guys cannot necessarily produce munitions, they represent an economy that is vastly larger collectively than the Russian economy in its current state. And the Ukrainians likely are aware of this. And there has been a campaign, right, while Europe has not really mobilized its ability to produce weapons and munitions for its own defense, Ukraine has not had that problem. They have focused heavily on creating a military industrial complex that can supply their own weapon systems, that can keep themselves in the fight, right? They've literally gone through a bunch of onshoring for their weapon systems. Now, there's some things that they cannot do, right? HIMARS strikes, for example, ATACMS missiles, sophisticated weapon systems. They just don't really have those parts. But their strategy is not focused on, for example, relying on heavy tank assaults, on highly sophisticated weapon systems. It relies on $500 drones and commercially available reconnaissance weapons. So I think that Ukraine may be sizing things up and saying, listen, we may be able to tell the United States to go fuck itself. Because even if the sanctions were to be lifted, no amount of lifted sanctions is going to create Russian men willing to sign up for military service. I think that is the fundamental problem, a fundamental quandary. Now, it doesn't mean that it's good, right? Reduced U.S. sanctions are going to enable Russia to smooth and better acquire goods and services for its military, but it's also worth bearing in mind that the Russians have not had as big a problem as you might think getting this thing done. And Russia itself, of course, they're also trying to project strength. And why wouldn't you, right? And as we've talked about, the goal of negotiations is to meet in the middle. But when you have someone like the United States pushing Ukraine and pushing what they consider the potential deal towards the center, Russia is going to, of course, Putin's a skilled negotiator, right? They actually are starting to move further back, meaning that they want their middle now to look more like a Russian victory. And this is what we're starting to see, right? Moscow now says, this is from Sergei Lavrov. He said, quote, "The president, Putin, has clearly said that we, the Russians, are ready to negotiate with Ukraine, with Europe, and with any representatives who, in a spirit of goodwill, would like to help achieve peace." But he added, "We will cease hostilities only when these negotiations produce a firm, sustainable result that suits the Russian Federation." And then he adds, of course, the realities on the ground must be considered, which is his code for the territory we hold, we want to keep, right? Of course, there's always usually a wink and a nod that says that this doesn't apply to Kursk. Now, Lavrov said that consultation with U.S. officials and the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and the Russian Embassy in Washington are scheduled for this week. Again, some of these, there are some things that I think are fine, right? To sit there and say, listen, we should resume diplomatic relations. Okay. I am a pragmatic guy. I don't believe in, I think symbolic acts like closing an embassy is less effective and sometimes can actually offset real questions of what can we do that actually produces results. Again, this was my gripe with the Europeans who love symbolic gestures, but forget that symbolic gestures cannot win a war, right? The only way to win a war is to destroy the enemy's ability to fight their own war. And so if no amount of strongly worded statements or symbolic pledges of support or even official state visits can offset the fact that you have to win a war by eliminating your enemy's ability to resist. right? And that is what the Ukrainians need to do. And the fact is that when the United States is at its best, it's able to do the things that Europeans are incapable of, which is providing real military support, right? And the Europeans, in turn, simply provide sort of feel-good truisms. Now, we're going to talk about my gripes with much of the Trump leadership. But before we talk about that, I wanted to mention, of course, that you may know that I am not exactly espousing popular positions for any government. In fact, in this video alone, I've criticized basically every single participant in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And the reason I can do it is because I don't depend on sponsors. I don't depend on major media outlets. I don't depend on anybody but you guys. That's because I have Combat Vet News and all of my members there. You guys know that every Tuesday and Thursday, I get uncensored combat videos, some of which are sent to me from units on the front line. They send me what they are up to, and we do a deep dive on the current state of the fighting. Totally uncensored. This is stuff that YouTube would never let me show you, and it's available to any one of these tiers, right? Now, if you want to do the Q&A, right, those drop every Thursdays, and those are for Lieutenant and Colonel tier and above. So if you want to become a member, support me, help me out, Combat Vet News is the place. Link is in that description. So thanks again to all you guys that do help me out. Okay. Again, I don't want to become and I am not an anti-Trump YouTuber, right? That is not what I am, right? I am a Ukrainian. I am a world conflict YouTuber, but part of what I do is make sure you guys have the information you need to see the world clearly as it is. And sometimes that means I've criticized the Biden White House extensively. So guess what? I've got to say, Trump's doing some dumb shit too, right? And check this one out. Dan Bongino, guys, is a podcaster. And he is now deputy FBI director. Now, listen, being a podcaster doesn't mean that you're not intrinsically not qualified, right? Just because you have a camera and a mic doesn't mean you can't run it. But here's the problem. When you're the deputy FBI director, particularly under someone like Kash Patel, right? Kash Patel has his own sort of problems, right? He doesn't have a lot of high-level organizational leadership experience. He's a pretty low-level guy whose primary, we'll say, trait is that he is super turbo pro-Trump, literally made a pro-Trump children's book. Now, you can have people like that head your agency. Sometimes you need a head of your agency whose primary job is to get people excited, right? I think actually that's Elon Musk's greatest strength, right? He doesn't build the rockets. He doesn't make Twitter, right? You couldn't run as many companies as he does, but what he somehow manages to do is get people really hype about his ventures and get people really passionate about working for them. So you may not need to be that have this great organizational skill. We've certainly seen that with his Doge audits. But you can be have some pretty sparse qualifications and still be a good agency head. But there's a big asterisk because you need a deputy who is the opposite. You need a deputy who knows how to run your agency inside and out. You need a deputy who is technical, who knows the agencies, all the people, is on a first-name basis with all those major office heads, who knows exactly what you guys are capable of, what your strengths are, what your agency's weaknesses are, where the flaws are, where they need the most help, right? You need to have, if you're going to have a leader who looks up and out, you need to have a deputy who looks down and in. And so when you see the deputy FBI director is a fucking podcaster, you start to worry, right? And here is this guy's biography. I'll just explain to you the gripe that I have, right? Is that, one, he's the deputy director of the FBI, but he has never, not for a single day, worked in the FBI. He spent 4 years as a New York City cop. No shade. New York City cops are great. And then joined the U.S. Secret Service and was in their New York field office, and then became a instructor at their academy, and then was at the Presidential Protective Service, right? until 2011. So 12 years in the Secret Service in the Presidential Protection Division. Very, very, it is no joke, right? This is a serious guy who is seriously good at his job. But it's really important to note that he has not at any point led an organization any larger than perhaps an individual protective detail. It's not even clear he was supervisory during that time frame, given that his rank was special agent, because typically a supervisory person is going to get the title of senior special agent, an SSA. So the fact that he was not supervisory is troubling, right? Again, picture this is a problem for the same reason that a Starbucks barista is not qualified to be the CEO of Starbucks. Okay. This is the same reason that a junior medical intern should not be the chief surgeon of a hospital. And if you believe that heart surgery is something that should not be done by someone with less than, with no supervisory experience, then probably, or rather a department, a surgery department should not be headed by someone who has never supervised anyone in their life. Then you also have to admit that the FBI, which has tens of thousands of agents, also should probably not be headed by someone with no leadership experience. Again, this is someone who failed in several campaigns for the U.S. Senate, which again, no shade, but this is also somebody who then became a podcaster, right? Who failed, 1, 2, 3 political campaigns, and then became just a podcaster. I don't know what else to tell you. In fact, a podcaster who was kicked off of YouTube. And I'm not going to speak to his politics because I care less about that. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to audit this guy's politics. But what I am here to do is tell you that whether or not you are qualified to head these agencies, and there is no evidence this person is qualified to be the deputy FBI. Again, this is someone who has spent 0 days carrying the FBI badge, 0 days supervising other special agents. This is a huge problem. I don't know how else to express it. Again, it's like I can't. I don't even have good analogies, right? The closer one I have, again, imagine someone's going to do surgery on your mom, and they say, "Well, I'm not actually you're going to do heart surgery on an aging parent," and the surgeon goes, "Listen, I'm not actually a heart surgeon. I spent several years as an orthopedic surgeon doing feet, but it's basically the same thing. I'm sure it is." And they go, "Well, you don't even know. You how do you know it's the same? You've never done heart surgery." Just like this guy goes, "Listen, I protected a president. I know how law enforcement works." It's like, do you? Because it doesn't appear that you've done, for example, have you ever led a team doing a child sexual abuse investigation? Something the FBI does all the time. Have you ever done a public corruption investigation? No. So if you haven't done these things, how do you know it's exactly the same? And if you would have concerns over that, if you would have concerns over a foot surgeon doing heart surgery on your parent, then you should also have concerns about a Secret Service agent and podcaster supervising an entire federal agency that he was never a part of its mission or job set. So, again, I want to point out 2 other things that I find disturbing because it's the same trend, really. And one is that apparently the rumor is that Elon Musk's private security detail has been deputized by the U.S. Marshals Service. And this is a problem because, again, we do not know anything about the qualifications of Elon Musk's private security detail. You cannot become deputy U.S. Marshals. That's what deputizing means. You cannot become deputy U.S. Marshals simply by being a bodyguard, right? Because now you notice that being a deputy means you have the authority to arrest people. You have the authority to carry a weapon anywhere. None of these things, we have no fucking idea if these people are qualified. And sort of by definition, they're probably not because they're bodyguards. They're not U.S. Marshals. So we don't know. If you were a Navy SEAL, again, I can tell you that being at the top tier of military operations does not mean you know the job of doing law enforcement. And I know I was a military police officer, combat operations, even being an MP. The difference between being an MP and being a civilian law enforcement officer is night and day, right? When you're on a military base, you're subject to a literal different set of laws called the UCMJ. And so if I can sit there and say I would never have been qualified to simply get handed a badge and say, congratulations, MP, you are now a Kansas State Highway Patrol officer. I'd be like, well, I don't know any Kansas statutes, guy. I don't know. I barely know what the speed limits are on these roads, right? I don't know when I can perform a search under Kansas law. I don't know how to charge somebody. I don't know the elements of murder or kidnapping or assault. And if I charge people with the wrong crime, they're going to go to court and it's going to get thrown out. So you see how you just can't hand somebody these authorities just because they're loyal. But that is the fundamental problem that I have here, is that authorities are being given out by the US government based on loyalty first, foremost, and alone. And if you're a fan of this channel, you know that that was one of the reasons that the Chechen soldiers, Kadyrov's personal army, right? That is one of the reasons they are so fucking incompetent on the battlefield. That's one of the reasons that their only role they've been called the TikTok battalion, because they spend so much time behind the lines, sort of fighting in the backfields, shooting TikToks instead of being involved in active combat. And the reason, because the Chechens have really good gear. So a lot of people said, wow, they have really good gear. They look like they're in good shape. Why aren't they fighting in the thick of it? And the answer is, because when you are when you prioritize loyalty, right? If loyalty is the only trait that matters, you are going to lose competence, right? Who makes a good soldier? A good soldier has traits like courage, like thoughtfulness, like the ability to plan things, like the ability to think through a problem, like the ability to assess a situation, right? And of course, honor, loyalty, duty, service, sacrifice. Those are some of the values that all have to be embodied together. But when you're a strong man, right, honor is actually a problem. Because let's say the strong man, let's say you're Kadyrov, someone to do something that would dishonor them. An honorable person will say, I don't care that you're my boss. I don't care that you got me this position. I am loyal to you, but I'm loyal to my honor as well, so I can't do that. That's a problem for a dictator, and it's solved by appointing people who have one trait, one value, loyalty. But what that means is that when you find people who have just that one trait, it means you end up with a military, in this case, in the case of Kadyrov, where there is no competence, right? Where they're not good planners, where they're not thoughtful leaders, where they don't conduct themselves with honor, where they don't believe in sacrifice, because they don't need to. The only thing they need is loyalty. And when you build a government that's loyalty first, you become a fucking joke. Just like the Chechens in this war. They are a joke. They're used as blocking battalions because simply they're a different religion than the meat assaults that they are normally placed on. All that to say, when you prioritize loyalty over competence, you are setting your agencies up for failure. And whatever else you think about the FBI, right? These are the people, they are the only organization in our government that has the authority and mandate to find foreign intelligence agents that operate in our country, to arrest them and to put them in prison. Right? The CIA cannot arrest anyone inside the United States. They can't surveil anyone in the US. Only the FBI has that authority. And they are alone in that. And so that is the kind of thing that a lot of people forget. Whatever else you think the FBI does, their most important two roles, counterterror, counterintelligence. So I'm going to keep you guys posted as we learn more. Of course, thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you to Bill Collier, Robert Colberg, Gars Martin, Eugene DeQuesta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karius, L90, Petra Tararu. All of our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do it without you guys. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.